Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with a Total War Warhammer 2 community cast. And this time around, it's going to be a game submitted by viewer DerScheich. A bit of Vampire Coast against High Elves on the map Mosquito Swamp. And this is traditionally a match that's a bit tough for the Vampire Coast. Definitely not the easiest for them. It's kind of been one of the more difficult ones since their launch. There's really two ways most people approach it. Either they do a big old monster death ball with a lot of rotting leviathans and prometheans, or they do a big old artillery ball. So in this case, it looks like DerScheich has gone ahead and made a bit of an artillery blob. The high elf player having gone with a bit of a wider but melee-centric build, which is interesting. Usually you see more masters of shooting. So going over the lore choices here, we do have Count Noctilus for the Vampire Coast. Not much to be said for this guy. He's just a strong choice. He is a very potent caster. He's got Arcane Conduit, of course. He does have Melkos Miasma to slow and potentially control units like Cav, or fast flyers, units like that. Invocation of an Egg for the heals, of course. Drown Dead, very powerful. Summon, able to block off perching enemies, potentially trap enemies in an unfortunate position. Interesting enough, bringing Smoke and Mirrors, which I don't really think is worth it for the zombies, but the speed boost is not that beneficial on units that only go 23 speed, but hey, it is something. We do also have Wraithstorm, a very powerful bombardment spell that can do a lot of damage. If your opponent is not paying attention, you get a nice nuke on, say, a single entity, or a unit of cavalry, or bogged down unit of elite infantry, archers, whatever, it'll do damage. We also do have Captain Ross Moondial giving a long-range summon, potentially good for disrupting backlines, or otherwise good to sort of, once again, block off enemy Cav. In this situation, probably a lot better for blocking off Cav than it is for disrupting backlines, because there isn't much of a backline to be had. Now, alongside Count Noctilus, we do have a Gunnery Wight. This guy's coming in with full kit, which is a little crazy. You don't see that most of the time. He's got Dead Eyes, he's got more powder, Bomb Throw, Enchanted Ballistics, and the Cackle Fruit. Now, personally, I think both Cackle Fruit and Bomb Throw are a waste in this guy's case. 70-meter range on a magic missile is just terrible. It's very tough to make it work. It's one of the reasons I think Throg's Projectile Vomit is just a garbage ability as well. But we will see if we can get some use out of him. We also do have Enchanted Ballistics, very powerful when you've got a bit of an artillery death ball here. You can potentially buff all these units to be much more precise and much more consistent with their rate of fire. And of course, more powder is incredibly useful. It gets you more ammunition. It can potentially buff the Queen Bess a whole bunch and make her a beast. Now, besides that, front line, pretty narrow and small. A whole bunch of zombie pirate deckhands, single unit of polearms here on the flank. Basically just there to hold and stall against units like the Spearmen and the White Lions and those units. Definitely not going to be winning any honors here, but they will do their best, no doubt. Now, they are backed by two zombie pirate gunnery mobs with handguns. These guys are a very potent gunnery unit. Cheap. They're not accurate, but because they have so many models, 120, they will do good damage to units like the Flintspire Phoenix. They can definitely tear through cavalry or units like Swordmasters or White Lions, which we were seeing here. They're definitely a nasty unit. And a good point defense tool to support the Queen Bess and the mortars. And these mortars are already teeing off, as the Queen Bess, on the blob of squishy High Elf infantry. Now, backing them up, a nice little defensive formation here. We do have some zombie pirate deckhands with polearms, protecting the artillery pieces, able to push in and protect whatever artillery piece might need protecting. They are, of course, slow, so you don't want them running or out of position ahead of time. You want to keep them close to the units they're defending. Besides that, we do have two running Promethean gunnery mobs, one of them being the Lamprey's Revenge, Regiment of Renown, that does have regen, and these guys are already going to be coming under pressure as the Illyrian Reavers are swinging in from behind, the High Elves having the Vanguard deploy them to harass. Now, the High Elf Force, a little bit unusual in my opinion. For the Lord, we have a Prince. This is something you don't see very often. He's obviously the budget melee Lord option. Not much to be said for him. But, of course, he can do a good chunk of work against the squishier heroes that the Vampire Coast can bring. He can also do some support work with abilities such as the the Bane Shield. Blade of Belkalahar is, of course, a good self-buff, giving him some more melee prowess. And then, of course, Stand Your Ground being a very powerful melee defense buff. Now, weirdly enough, there's no caster for the High Elves, which I think is a big mistake, and definitely going to be hindering them in this engagement. Now, the front line is composed entirely of spears. These guys, of course, good for soaking up damage, though not great for soaking up direct hits from the Queen Bess. And this is definitely already brutal stuff. Their speed's reduced because of the Queen Bess's ability. They've lost about a third or maybe close to half of their HP, and they're definitely not looking too good. Over here, same thing happens with these spears just being exploded into tiny little elf chunks. having a horrible time of it. In the second line, we do have some archers. These guys are ready to rain death and destruction down on the Vampire Coast. These guys are very strong in this match. I actually personally like to go super wide with archers because it's a very powerful combination against the coast. But in this situation, they'll be playing a supporting role, perhaps overwhelming those gunnery mobs, which are getting a little greedy here, perhaps, and pushing a little forward to get shots on the Phoenix. Now, certainly they are doing damage, but the Phoenix is kind of kiting away, and it's going to be able to survive for at least a little bit. Now, besides that, we do have 2 white lions, very powerful units in this matchup, very good for mulching through basically every infantry unit that the coast has, except for Sirens. They'll even do rather well against the depth guard, because they do have some armor and they do have reasonable AP values. In the back, we do have a single unit swordmasters, definitely an interesting choice. I wouldn't recommend these guys despite their 20% shield chance. Just not worth it in my opinion. You're much better off bringing an extra unit of white lions or more archers or something like that. While certainly they will mulch depth guard or something, and they will tear through anything the vampire coast puts against you in the infantry field. Their vulnerability is just excessive, I think. On the flanks, though, we do have some silver helms. These guys are collapsing inward and we do, of course, have the Flamespire Phoenix, so providing a bit of magic, a bit of fire damage. If he gets on top of the Lamprey's Revenge, he could do some really good work. Though, as we can see here, high elf player getting a little bit cocky, pushing close with the Phoenix, which I think is a bit of a mistake. You definitely don't want to be doing this. The Phoenix is a very powerful unit, but if it gets caught out by these zombie pirate gunnery mobs, he's going to have a terrible day. You can't see, Melkos Miasma does go down here. Gunnery White most likely firing in on him, while you can see taking pot shots, and now the Phoenix is way too close and he is getting gunned to hell down. HP dropping, the Wraithstorm going down, and he's already lost over half his HP and losing more in a matter of seconds. Now he just tried to dive in on Count Noctilus, big misplay in my opinion, goes down and immediately is just going to get torn to shreds. Count Noctilus scores anti-large AP, though the AP doesn't really matter here. He's going to be able to lay the smack down this Phoenix, and if it doesn't get the proc of healing, it is screwed. Now in the meantime, the front line is engaging, but you can see these very sneaky Lunar Reavers diving through into the back line, compromising both units of handguns. Fortunately, the Phoenix does not get its regen, though, and dies. So, pretty horrible for the poor bird, just going down, just being trampled on by a bunch of filth. But, Lunar Reavers here, compromising the back line, doing a lot of damage to these gunnery mobs. The Enchanted Ballistics goes down. I think this ability should have gone down sooner. It would have probably been more valuable. In the meantime, though, you can see the Queen Bess firing off on the Swordmasters of Hoeth. They are already down a whole bunch, getting torn to shreds. The unit of archers has been decimated and routed from the field. And let's just watch this round of masonry. Is it going to make a beautiful connection on these poor Swordmasters? Overshooting a little bit, unfortunately, and does not make connection. So definitely a little disheartening there, but hey, at least the Queen Bess tried. Meantime, frontline fight definitely not going in the favor of the zombies. They are getting crushed pretty handily by the White Lions. In the back line, in the meantime, Spears actually managed to flank, and they are getting in on the Lamprey's Revenge, trying to get in on the Queen Bess, though failing. Over here, the Lyran Reavers, as well as the Prince, diving in and slugging out with the Lamprey's Revenge, doing a good chunk of work. But unfortunately, the Zombie Pirate Gunnery Mob overwhelmed and getting destroyed. Archery fire raining in on them and doing good amounts of work. In the meantime, Lamprey's Revenge swinging in. They've actually lost a model, so definitely it's a bit of a surprise. Trying to get in on the Lyran Reavers, who are in the meantime trying to get on Queen Bess. Now keep in mind, Queen Bess has a monstrous crew HP pool. I believe it's about 5,000 of her HP is crew, or maybe 5,500. So she's very tanky against this interference. In the meantime, the Gunnery White here being pressured by the Prince. And if we take a big old overarching look, we can see that the bounce of power is slightly in the Vampire Coast's favor. Their front line has buckled, so the zombies are almost all gone. And most of their shooting is actually gone at this point. The only really major shooting they have left is the Gunnery White, as well as the Queen Bess. Now granted, the Rotting Prometheans are still on the field, and they are going to present a major threat, as is Count Noctilus, being a very powerful caster. And with the Rotting Prometheans sort of being able to keep them in the fight, he will be a major threat to all this relatively low AP high elf army. Now the Spears here do get routed, overwhelmed from both sides by Rotting Prometheans, as well as Zombie Pirate Deckhands and the Queen Bess crew. Unfortunately, the archery fire is just overwhelming the Pirate Gunnery mobs, and they will not be able to stick around. The White Lions, though, being interdicted by Noctilus, being intercepted, the Gunnery White able to pull back as the polearms pour forward, as do some zombies, doing their very best to block off the incoming enemy troops and keep the Queen Bess on line. And she is decimating the Swordmaster. Swordmaster is now down to 19 models. Now the archers are still firing, still very much in the fight. But definitely some very, very chunky shots for the Queen Bess. Let's see if we can get a hit this time. You can see that bundle of flaming and sparking explosives piling in. Queen Bess is a pretty accurate artillery piece, so I'd hope this will connect. Just going to land in amongst these poor high elves and just some cinematic glory, detonating them into all sorts of little tiny bloody elf chunks. Oh my god, all of these guys just torn apart at the waist. Absolutely disgusting stuff. And instantly, the unit of high elf archers has lost over half its HP and about a third of its models. So these guys are already routed, single shot being enough to shatter them. That would break their morale. In the meantime, Noctilus here doing his very best to keep the high elf infantry off of his artillery pieces. Now, certainly the white lines are going to be a major threat. With all the buffs going down from the Prince, he's dropping the Bane Shield, he has dropped Stand Your Ground, he's going to be keeping these bad boys in the fight. They're going to be a tough customer to deal with. They are supported by the Silver Helms here, also a well-buffed unit. The problem is that the high elf player right now is being divided and conquered and sort of compartmentalized. Now, certainly you can say the same thing is happening for the Vampire Coast, but because these are all heroes and the heroes take forever to kill, it's not as much of an issue as these Silver Helms, for example, that are getting overwhelmed by pole arms and rotting Prometheans. So unfortunately, the Cav here kind of getting torn apart now. The Lamprey's Revenge here, which has lost a model earlier, diving in against the Silver Helms. They will be able to tear these guys to shreds. The gunnery mob firing into the melee is actually one of the reasons these guys do so well in sustained combat, and they're just going to be decimating these poor Silver Helms. Elsewhere in the meantime, you can see the rotting Prometheans here overwhelming the Silver Helms, and I think that once these Silver Helms are gone, it's going to be a very tough fight for the High Elves. Now, certainly White Lines could still do some work, but Noctilus is there, and White Lines are not a good counter to Noctilus. He does have a very high melee defense. He does have respectable armor, which is not the most important thing, but he does also have the hunger on top of that, good HP pull at 3700 base, and of course, potentially still heals and summons. He does get a zombie summon here, which is going to harass these archers off the field. And in the meantime, White Lines bog down the Queen Bess's crew. And like I said before, the Queen Bess's crew HP is monstrous. It is supporting these rotting Prometheans and protecting them from the White Lions, as are these deckhands. And because of that, the White Lions, who could probably do a good number on the Prometheans if they got on top of them, are not able to do as much as they would like. Now, the Prince does dive in here on the rotting Prometheans, swinging his sword, doing a bit of damage. These guys, while they do have very good armor, ultimately, the Prince does do 140 AP damage, and if he can single out individual entities, especially as they're drained and have lowered armor, we'll be able to knock him out. Queen Bess almost a goner, though she has gotten a few more shots off, trying to whittle down those archers. But I think at this point, Bounce of Power is swinging decisively in the favor of the Vampire Coast, and I think the High Elves are not going to be able to recover. The simple fact is that Prometheans are still around kicking. Now, certainly the Gunnery White has been sniped out. He's dead, lying in the gutter here. But with Noctilus still sitting around on a healthy 3400 HP, with the Lamprey's Revenge gutting these spears, and then going to be able to push into this pocket and just run everything over, it's going to be game over. Over here, the Archer's getting destroyed by Queen Bess shot, and with that out of the way, the poor High Elves do shatter, and it's just a... That's it. That's game. So, all in all, I think... some of the issues there were a little. I think some of the issues there were micro. I think some of the issues there was also some issues on the build side of things. So we're going to discuss those. I also thought some things there were interesting to see and performed rather well. So in the case of DerScheich, I think the build is largely good, but I think one significant problem would be bolt throwers. With the Queen Bess and the double mortar, if your high elf opponent decides to go with double or well, honestly even a single bolt thrower can be a serious threat. With no, you've got no spiteful shot to make your troops more accurate, and even if you did, mortars and Queen Bess are not dedicated anti-artillery pieces. A unit like mortars will knock out the Queen Bess relatively quickly, especially on a map that doesn't, where you don't really have berms or cover that you can hide behind. Queen Bess can do okay on certain maps, where there might be a very tall hill or a significant berm where you can, or rock maybe, where you can hide her behind him, and then your opponent's direct fire artillery can't hit her. But on a map like this one, you're very vulnerable to bolt thrower fire, and I think it would have been better to try to get some scurvy dogs on the field. Maybe ditch a mortar and get another unit of scurvy dogs just to harass the enemy backline in case there was one. The other critique I'd have is bring all the abilities on the Gunnery White as well as the Smoke and Mirrors on Count Noctilus. Is in my opinion just not worthwhile. You could easily strip down the Gunnery White and have him just there for the ammunition and the enchanted ballistics, and you don't really need all of his abilities tacked on. And that would save you some money. You could potentially chevron up a mortar, perhaps get another unit of scurvy dogs, stuff like that. And I think that would help you a lot in rounding out this build against more varied high elf builds. Because while certainly against the common archer spam, it'll do well, and against a more melee-centric build, it could do okay, as it did here. I think that against a build that is more standoffish, your opponent might bring some counter battery play, maybe even some magic missile or magic play to shut down your artillery, you could face significant problems. Now for the High Elf player here, I think the problems were a bit more noticeable. One, no caster. Now, you can certainly... There are many people who say you can't get away without a caster. There are a handful of specific builds where you can get out without a caster, but I don't think this is one of them. I think you should almost always try to bring a caster into a game, all niche exceptions aside. In this case, it could have been a huge boon. Being able to debuff enemy armor, being able to heal his more elite troops, potentially being able to heal his lord could have been a huge boon. Having something like Awakening of the Wood to disrupt backlines. Honestly, having a source of magic damage to counter potential Cyrene play would have been huge. Whether you bring, and there's just so many ways you could approach it. You could bring you could bring Lore of High Magic, have the new and improved Fiery Convocation, have Apotheosis and Hand of Glory. If you don't want that, you can bring you can bring a Lore Master of Hoeth. If you're worried about elite infantry, instead of bringing Sword Masters, bring a Lore Master of Hoeth, who will still dice through elite infantry pretty well, and at the same time he can provide you with Spirit Leech and Earthblood, and provide you with some magic resistance on the front line, perhaps, or extra leadership to keep your troops in the fight. Things like that. I think even if you don't want to bring a caster lord, even if you do want to roll with a prince, which sure it's fine, but even if you want to roll with the prince, bring a caster. And also, I have ditched some of the abilities on the prince. Deadly Onslaught, for example, on a horse, a complete waste in my opinion. Same with the Blade of Belkor Hadris. If you're going to snipe squishy garbage characters like the Gunnery Wight, or maybe a Vampire Caster, or even trying to get in on lower end Vampire count lords or cheaper ones, you're gonna get by just fine in my opinion with cycle charging and the Blade of Belkor Hadris, or without the Blade of Belkor Hadris. That's really an item in my opinion that you want to bring if you're going on a dragon, because at that point the 26 melee attack and extra damage output really matters. But on a horse, you can save the money and invest it somewhere else. Like I said, I do think the Swordmasters were a bit of a mistake. The only other issue I had with this build was, really that I had with the strategy from Mighty Marin, was the disjointed approach. The Swordmasters came in way late, and I understand he was worried about the Queen Bess, but at the same time, that meant that the Queen Bess got to focus other troops early and then butchered the Swordmasters as they were coming in. The Flamespire Phoenix came in basically solo. Now, the one unit of Legionnaires followed it up and did get in on the gun, so sure, that was a win in that sense, but you lost an entire Flamespire Phoenix. You can't gamble on the heal on it. I think it's the randomized heal is a bit of a garbage mechanic, but all that aside, you can't count on that to bring your Flamespire Phoenix back. So rather than throwing the Phoenix away before any of your other units are helping, keep it safe, stay out of range. None of these units can threaten you at long range. I think the longest range here is like the Gunnery Wight. That can actually threaten a Phoenix, because neither Queen Bess nor the Mortar are significant threats. And then once you're actually in position to overwhelm your opponent, that's when you hit. That's when you have the Flamespire Phoenix diving in. That's when you've got the Leader Maneuvers and the Silverhelms coming in. But instead, the disjointed attack, where you had the Phoenix come in, and then the Leader Maneuvers came in, and the Silverhelms and Lord came in, ultimately meant that, well, it didn't work. It ultimately meant that the Rotting Prometheans especially just held their own and took down one unit at a time. That's usually where elites excel. If they can fight one at a time, if they're not getting swarmed, they will do really well. And so these high-end Rotting Promethean gunnery mobs just had a field day. But regardless, those are my critiques there. Definitely a fun game. Good, well done to both players. Do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you're interested in more community casts, certainly feel free to send replays my way. I will be leaving a email link down below where you can submit your replays. If you have any comments, critiques, questions, as usual, don't hesitate to ask. I do my very best to try to answer them as promptly as possible. I do read all your guys' comments and really appreciate all the feedback. So, as usual, hope you guys enjoyed, and I will be seeing you all in the next one.